Welcome to a special YouTube inbox edition of Sound Off Extra here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off Wrestling podcast, which you can hear episodes of in full every Sunday on the Solomonster.com, iTunes, and Stitcher Radio. And we do a mailbag segment on the podcast that you can always send questions to me for. The Solomonster at gmail.com is the email address for that. And if you like what you hear, you can support the Sound Off by making a PayPal donation on thesolomonster.com. You'll see the PayPal box on the right-hand side. I've been meaning to do this for a while, very backlogged with questions, so I said, you know what, I have a little bit of free time. Let's get a YouTube inbox going, so I hope to do these on a more regular basis. And got about 20, maybe 22 questions here I'm going to try to barrel through on this particular episode. So we're going to get right into it here. First question comes from Jermaine from Chicago. He says, being that Randy Orton got bloodied up back at Money in the Bank, albeit accidentally, now Bray Wyatt got bloodied up by Ric Flair, and now a possible angle within an angle with Summer Rae and Layla sharing a lesbian kiss at Madison Square Garden, puts me under the impression that WWE is kind of sort of weaning away from the PG era and back to what many older fans like myself are hoping they go back to having. An era, maybe not the Attitude Era, but a little like the Ruthless Aggression Era, but with a blend of sports entertainment and some shock value. Are you under that impression also, or is it just me? It's just you. You know, Randy Orton getting bloodied up at Money in the Bank was a mistake, and if you go back and watch it, they took painstaking measures, Kevin Dunn did, to make sure they didn't shoot Orton as much as possible. I mean, it was impossible not to show him with blood pouring down his face. He was part of the finish. But if you go back and watch, I mean, they were trying very hard not to show it. Bray Wyatt, for those, I don't know, people may be listening to this video months down the road, there was a Madison Square Garden house show this past weekend. Ric Flair was a special guest. This was before Flair came back on TV on Monday night. And threw a few punches at Bray Wyatt, one of which connected. I believe Flair was wearing both of his Hall of Fame rings. I don't know why you would do that if you're going to punch somebody. But he caught Bray with one of those shots and opened him up. Also an accident. They are not bringing back blood. They are not reverting back to the Attitude Era. They're not bringing back anything from that era. I mean, look, they will push the envelope every now and then. You know, we'll have an Extreme Rules match, and we'll have kendo sticks and steel chairs and weapons and stuff. And guys are going to get cut open. You know, it's going to happen. But it's not any sort of sign that they're getting more relaxed or they're going back to an era, you know, from 10 or 12 years ago. That's just not the case. Brian from Orlando, Florida, do you think Cesaro's momentum has completely halted since the pairing with Paul Heyman? Moreover than that, I remember the night after WrestleMania, the reaction that he got initially with Heyman was great, but over time he definitely cooled off. Can it be that Paul Heyman is at fault for him not having gotten more over? Also, with guys like Curtis Axel and Ryback who were, quote, Heyman guys, can you blame the wrestlers, Heyman, or the booking? Everyone assumes that this person or this diva should be Paul Heyman people, but if you think about it, all non-established stars are failing miserably with Heyman. Well, let's go back to the beginning of the question first. Has Cesaro's momentum halted since the pairing? Absolutely. I don't see how you can objectively look at it and say that he's in a better position now than he was. And that's disappointing because I was really enthusiastic about the pairing with Heyman. I questioned it a little bit just because he seemingly was on the cusp of becoming a big babyface. People were already cheering him, the big swing. He had that big Battle Royal win at WrestleMania that people went crazy for at the Superdome. I was there. The place went nuts. And it kind of came out of left field. It's like, well, we're going to pull him back to the heel side for a while, but he'll be with Paul Heyman, so he'll be okay. And it hasn't quite worked out that way, and it's such a weird thing to think that here we are all these months later, and they split up the Real Americans because it was Swagger and Cesaro. And the person who is the most over right now is Jack Swagger. Now, I don't know if that's going to last. It may just be because, you know, Rusev is over and the stuff they're doing with them now is getting a reaction. I think Rusev and Lana, that act is so over. And you have the fans who, you know, I'm not saying that everybody is cheering for Swagger per se. They're probably just cheering for America more than anything else. But the last several weeks, Jack Swagger has gotten reactions that he hasn't gotten at any other point during his career, even when he was the world champion all those years ago. Swagger is over. He is one of the most popular acts, him and Zeb, right now on the roster. And like I said, whether that lasts or not, probably not. But you look at where Swagger is and look at where Cesaro is. Who the hell would have thought that Swagger would be more over than Cesaro as a babyface? I don't know anybody who ever would have predicted that. So, has he cooled off? Yes. But as far as Paul Heyman is concerned, I got to defend Paul Heyman here. Because they put Axel with him, they put Ryback with him. True, they didn't get any more over. But how can you really blame Paul Heyman for that, would be my question. You know, they put these guys with Heyman who have already been just beaten down and beaten down and beaten down. And after a while, it just gets to a point where you're pigeonholed a certain way. People look at you as a jobber. Or just a low to mid-card guy who's not a big star. Or was a star but isn't anymore. And probably is never going to get back to that level. They completely botched whatever they had with Ryback. They put themselves in a corner with that whole thing when they beat him for the first time, and he was never the same after that. In fact, Ryback went on a streak, I would joke about it on the sound-off, of months and months and months of being probably more over than his push was at the time, because I couldn't remember the last time he had won a pay-per-view match. He went months without winning a pay-per-view match, and then finally they turned him heel, and they put him against Cena. And then, as is usually the case, Cena beat him at the end of the feud, and Ryback was pretty much dead when that was over. You could probably point that out a lot of different times with feuds that John Cena has been involved in, but that's a different question. So, is Heyman really responsible? I mean, can Heyman really be expected to, on his own, rehab these guys back to a position where people take them seriously? It's all in the booking. I mean, look at what they did with these guys after they put them with Heyman. Axel won the Intercontinental title, and if I remember correctly, he lost probably more than he won. He would go out there on SmackDown, and he would go out there on Raw, and he would lose. And he would lose some more, and he would lose some more. And Ryback, too. Ryback was not immune to losing. And they would show Heyman with his head in his hands like he was disappointed. How can Heyman do anything about that? When you put these guys with him, and you're still treating them as jobbers, and you're beating them week in and week out, you can only expect so much from Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman can't change the outcome of the matches, right? So how much of that blame can you lay on Heyman? I mean, he's laid a few eggs recently, but I don't know that I would put that on his doorstep. I think more often than not, if I had the choice of taking somebody who isn't quite at the main event level, they're missing something, they don't talk well, but they've got something. This guy's going to be a star. They just need that little extra something. Paul Heyman is the guy that I would think of. Put the two of them together. That's what they did with Brock when they brought Brock in back in 2002. Brock was probably going to be a big star anyway, but he was brand new. Nobody knew who he was. He was a shitty talker. Heyman is exactly what he needed to help elevate him to that next level. So I think that's the perfect role for Paul Heyman to be in. You can't just take a job guy and expect that by putting them with Paul Heyman, he's got the Midas touch, all of a sudden the guy's going to be worth gold. If that were the case, they could have put fucking JTG with Paul Heyman. Or Kurt Hawkins. There's a reason they didn't do that, thank God. Paul from Ireland. I have noticed in recent years, Bret Hart within the internet wrestling fans' minds has gone from being the best ever to being bashed. While it could be said Bret does say some things in interviews that may make people roll their eyes, there's no denying that he is one of the best, if not the best. Shawn Michaels is one of the best as well, but I think in recent years, Bret has been seen as number 2 to Shawn. I love HBK, but if you look back at them both when they were on top in their prime and when they were mid-card and undercard acts in their early years, there's no denying Bret is superior. I do think WWE tends to go with HBK in this regard. Just wondering if you think Bret's legacy has gotten a bit of a bashing with regards to a lot of these shoot interviews and things that he has done. Bret Hart, when he does interviews, has a tendency to talk about himself very effusively. He talks about himself in glowing terms, and probably rightfully so. Look, I was a Bret Hart fan when I was younger. You know, Bret was carrying WWE on his back, I would say, in 93 and 94, and even 95. 95 was a shitty year for Bret Hart. I mean, I know he won the belt at Survivor Series, but look at what he did for the rest of the year. They put him in feuds with Bob Backlund, which was probably the worst match that Bret has ever had at WrestleMania. They put him in a feud with Hakushi, who was great, and they actually had a really, really good match at an In Your House pay-per-view that year, but Hakushi was never pushed as a major threat or a major guy. It was a demotion for Bret. He kind of moved down the card to work with him, but then he worked with the Pirate, Jean-Pierre Lafitte, also not a bad wrestler, but you know, Isaac Yankem, Jerry Lawler's fucking evil dentist. I mean, 1995 was not the best year for Bret. But still, he would go out there and have these really good matches. He had some more matches that year with Owen. And, for that period, he was carrying that company on his shoulders. And in 96, they went with Shawn. And they put it on Shawn, right? Bret went away for a while. He took a vacation. Shawn was going to carry the company. He was going to be the champion. And I think they're very similar in that Shawn also went out there. He had great matches with a lot of guys. He brought Kevin Nash to the best match of his career. He had maybe Mick Foley's best match, like pure wrestling match of his career. You go back and watch that Mind Games match. So they were very similar. I can't say one was superior over the other as far as that goes. Shawn was a better athlete than Bret was, and he did more high-flying, flashy moves. I would say Bret was a better mat wrestler than Shawn was. So it was kind of a wash. They each had qualities that I think if you put the two of them together, it would make like the perfect pro wrestler. Does Bret say things that tarnish his legacy? Yeah, probably. Like I said, he talks very highly of himself. It's one thing for me or you to say to somebody else, hey, I think you're the best of all time. But when you turn around and you say you're the best of all time, people read into that as, hey, this guy's got a big ego. He's got a big chip on his shoulder. Bret has a tendency to wax a little too eloquently about himself in interviews. And also, he look, I don't know if it's the stroke or what it was. He doesn't pull any punches when he does interviews and he talks about Triple H, for example. He does not like Triple H. They're on amicable terms now, but he does not like Triple H. He does not think very highly of Triple H as this all-time great performer. Remember the whole 4 out of 10, meme thing that became a big thing? I mean, he has said some pretty cruel things about the guy, and I would imagine it's got to be at least a little bit awkward. Every time they bring Bret back, he probably deals directly with Hunter, so that's got to be a little weird. But he's got a lot of opinions on a lot of different people, and he thinks very highly of himself. So in the eyes of some people, yes, that has tarnished his legacy. To me, it doesn't make a difference what he says now or what he does now. He's long retired. He had the stroke and everything else. He hasn't wrestled. I mean, legitimately wrestled in almost 15 years. I'm not counting the stuff he did in 2010 because I would hardly call that wrestling. To me, Bret will still go down as one of the best of all time. And I said this actually on the podcast I did this past weekend. Still throws the best worked punch in pro wrestling that I've ever seen. That's one of the things I like the most about Bret. He was realistic. He would go in there and the way he would throw punches and do certain maneuvers, and even the way he took bumps. I mean, I used to watch Bret Hart back in the day, and I would think, God, this guy's getting his ass kicked. Like legit, this guy's in there taking a beating. And that chest first bump he would take in the corner when they launched him into it and all that kind of stuff. Bret, there's a lot of little things about Bret that I think people don't give him credit for that I do and that I appreciate about what he brought to the table. So Bret, to me, is one of the best of all time. I won't call him the best. Maybe he would feel differently if you asked him the same question. This comes from Sandman. I've heard Vince McMahon would never make his workers do anything that worker did not want to do, as was the case with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12. With Owen Hart, if he wanted to not do the stunt at Over the Edge, was there any thought on Vince trying it himself or rehearsals done on that night before the pay-per-view? It's possible Vince did. I mean, I never read anything about, they had a whole lawsuit and a court case and everything else. I don't think that Vince did it himself. It just never came up. And it goes back to the whole thing, who's responsible, whose fault is it? And Bret said that Owen didn't want to do it. He probably didn't. You're up 80 feet in the air, being lowered from the ceiling, especially if Owen was afraid of heights. I don't know if he was or not. Shit, I wouldn't want to do it either. But the thing is, he did it before. Some people forget about this. That wasn't the first time that Owen Hart was being lowered from the ceiling. I think even a few weeks before that, he was doing the Blue Blazer character on TV, and he was being lowered from the ceiling then, no different than he was going to be that night. So if he had a problem with it, he should have said something about it, and it's too bad that he didn't if he felt like his job were at stake. Because that's what's been said. Owen didn't want to speak up. He didn't want to rock the boat. He didn't want to jeopardize his spot on the card. I just think that's so sad because here's a guy who was a veteran. He had been part of that company for so many years. I know he wasn't like a world champion. He wasn't a main eventer at that time. He was wrestling that night for the Intercontinental belt. But he was on that roster for so long and such a tenured guy that you would think in his mind that he would have, enough cachet to go over to Vince or whoever and say, listen, you know what? I don't feel comfortable about this. I don't want to do this. So if we can change it, if we could do it a different way. And by all accounts, he never said a word. At least not to Vince or anybody else. Maybe he did to his brother, but that to me is what makes that whole thing so sad, is that all that had to happen was, if he was that worried about it, just tell Vince McMahon or Vince Russo or whoever's idea it was, I'm not doing it. Because I don't think they would have fired him. I mean, really, would they have fired Owen Hart if he said, no, I'm not doing the stunt. I'm not letting you lower me 80 feet from the ceiling? I find it very doubtful that they would have. Maybe they would have punished him some other way, but I don't think that he would have lost his job over it. Sandman also says, King of the Ring 1994. I saw in a recent Botchamania clip, they had Gorilla Monsoon, Randy Savage, and Art Donovan on commentary, with Art almost bashing wrestling and asking Gorilla, do you enjoy this? Just wanted to know if you could shed some background on this and what the original plan was. The original plan was exactly what you saw on television. It was Art Donovan, who was a big star in the NFL, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I want to say he played for the Baltimore, maybe it was the Colts back in the day. I know now it's the Ravens, but he was a local sports celebrity, long retired, and they wanted a local sports celebrity to be brought in to do some color commentary with Monsoon and Randy Savage. So they brought in Art Donovan, who clearly knew nothing about professional wrestling, had no business being there. He came off as this very affable, almost like childlike, because he was blown away by the whole thing. I remember watching, one of the tournament matches that night. It was like probably Mabel and somebody else. And he just couldn't believe that you had these two wrestlers in the ring who weren't in the same weight class. He goes, how is this even allowed? This guy weighs so much more than the other guy, and how much does this guy weigh, and how much does that guy weigh? IRS came to the ring, how IRS used to be dressed. He goes, hey, he looks like a businessman. It was funny, but it was also cringeworthy, and I'll never forget, during the pay-per-view at one point, Monsoon and Savage, more so Monsoon, you could tell Gorilla just was fucking fed up with this guy. Randy Savage at least tried to be respectful. After a while, Monsoon just completely ignored every question he was asked. He pretended like he didn't even exist. So at one point, they have a live shot of the announcer sitting at ringside, and you see all three of them. And the camera very slowly zooms in on Monsoon and Savage, and they completely crop Art Donovan out of the shot. It was pretending like he wasn't even there. Now, why they didn't just send somebody out in between matches to give the guy the hook and say, thanks, okay, this is good, and just bring him backstage, I have no idea. The only thing I could think of is Vince McMahon was not there that night. I think to this day that might be the only pay-per-view that Vince ever missed. I think he was having neck surgery, and so he missed the show. He wasn't there. So I don't know who was in charge. Maybe because Vince wasn't there, they felt like, well, we can't pull this guy because if Vince finds out that we did that, he won't be happy. I don't know. I don't know why you wouldn't send somebody out there to give that guy the hook. But it was exactly what it was supposed to be. It just, the guy didn't know jack shit about wrestling. It was embarrassing. But it was also kind of funny. So if you've never seen or heard Art Donovan's commentary, people have put together funny kind of compilations of all of his greatest quotes from that night. A very famous night at the King of the Ring in 1994. I would definitely seek out those videos and take a listen. Rodrigo from Brazil, do you think AJ Lee is overrated? I absolutely think she got huge rubs by interacting with the likes of Cena, Punk, Bryan, Kane, and Dolph, but nowhere did I feel she was outclassed by any of them. You could argue that any diva would have gotten over by working with those guys. AJ has talent, and she's managed to make a gold mine out of what she has been given, but do you think she is overhyped? I don't think so. I mean, what's overhyped about her? Do they go out there calling her the greatest diva of all time? I've never heard them say that. She's this pint-sized little warrior who goes out there and kicks ass and has, quite frankly, a finishing submission hold that is far better than most of the finishing holds that a lot of the male main event guys have. I'll take AJ's Black Widow over whatever the fuck that STF is supposed to be that John Cena does any day of the week. There's nothing about John Cena's STF that looks even remotely devastating. AJ Lee, her move looks devastating. Some of the other women, too, have used submission holds recently. Emma, We don't get to see her on TV very often these days, but the Emma lock, that looks painful. There's nothing about John Cena's move that looks painful. So I think she's a good wrestler. She's got a few different moves in her arsenal. She's fun to watch. She's over. People are into her for different reasons, of course. Some people are into her because she looks like a young pre-pubescent girl, and that's a little creepy. Some people like her because they just think she's cute. Some people like her because, one day... Look, I'm sure there's a lot of young female fans out there who look at AJ Lee the way that AJ used to look at Lita. The famous shot of AJ when she was younger meeting Lita and then crying and all that. Probably a lot of young girls out there who see AJ as this tiny wrestler who says, hey, if she can do that, I can do that. So she's got a big following. I think she's got over 1 million followers on Twitter, something like that. I mean, so does Zack Ryder, so I guess that doesn't really mean much. But overrated, I wouldn't say she's overrated. I think she's probably one of the best divas that they have ever had. And I don't know that if you took Oksana and put her in the same programs that AJ had with Cena and Punk and Bryan and Dolph, Oksana ain't getting over the way that AJ did. It's just not happening. So I wouldn't say she's overrated. Andrew Sieber, what are your thoughts on WWE doing an NXT road tour, having them do smaller venues so people who don't live in or near Florida can see the new talent? I think it would be good and bad. It would be good because I think if those guys were able to go on a real tour and go all over the country, it would kind of give them that experience that wrestlers used to have when they would work different territories, because they weren't just working in one place. Like if you worked in Florida, after a while you can leave and go to Texas, and after that you can leave Texas and go to California or Portland or New York or wherever. I mean, Stampede up in Calgary. There were tons of different places back 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it just doesn't exist like that anymore. So I think it would be good for them in that respect to perform in front of different crowds instead of the same people all the time. But I know why they don't do it, and it would be bad because if they leave Florida, then they're not able to be at the performance center. And they have their drills, they have their classes, they have to be there at a certain time every day, every morning. They do their training. So they have to keep it close to home, or else it becomes a major expense, which is the other aspect of it. They're cutting costs like crazy. Supposedly Vince McMahon wants them to trim up to $20 million from their budget, which is going to be coming from a whole lot of different places. They can't even really afford right now to take those NXT guys and put them on the road to other places. So I just think right now it would be a bad idea. But in a perfect world, they would be able to leave Florida just because you want to get out there. You want to be able to perform in different places, different buildings, in front of different people, and they're not really getting that right now. Zach writes in, if you had the ability to go back in time and change one main event, or one event, I should say, in pro wrestling history in either WWE or WCW, which event would you change, how would you change it, and why? I wish that if I had the ability to do so, I could go back to 2007 and stop the Benoit stuff from happening. I think that's the easy answer. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to go back in time and stop, Benoit from doing what he did? 3 lives were lost in that whole thing, including a kid. So you could talk about Owen Hart and all of these other horrible things that have happened in wrestling, but if I could go back in time and change one event, that would be it. Marco from Jersey, with you being my favorite podcaster, I was wondering who, if any, were your favorites to listen to, wrestler and non-wrestler included. I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to podcasts, which is kind of funny being that I do one. The ones that, like the wrestler ones that I listen to, I'm a big fan of Steve Austin when he interviews people. I remember listening to Austin when he first started his show, and listening to him now, he's improved a lot. And he's actually a pretty good interviewer. What I like about Austin when he interviews people, and this is what bugs me about other people who do interviews, and I try not to do this on the occasions when I do interviews, is they'll ask a question, and it could be a really interesting question that people would want to know the answer to, but for whatever reason, the guy, the person you're interviewing is kind of dancing around it, or he's taking a long time to get to the point, and then he gets cut off, or he loses his train of thought, and then they move on. And you never get the answer to the question. One thing I've noticed about Austin, very rarely does that happen during the interviews that he does. He stays on point. He's got his notes, he's got a plan, he knows exactly what he's doing, and if he asks a question and doesn't get the answer, or the person forgets, he'll go right back to that question. And he'll remind, and the person's like, oh yeah, right, I forgot. And then they'll give you the answer you're looking for. It's a small thing, but I really like that about his interview style. I've listened to Jericho's interviews. I can't say that I listen to Jericho's podcast a lot. You know, a lot of the stuff that he does and the singing, I'm not a fan of that. But he's done some good interviews. As far as non-wrestler podcasts, I mean, the good thing is if you're a wrestling fan and you're into podcasts like video, audio, whatever, you're in heaven because you have this endless supply of wrestling podcasts. I mean, there's so many out there. You know, I hate to leave out, you know, there's a lot of good ones out there. Some of them I've even, you know, appeared on before. You know, but PWR, Pro Wrestling Report, Wrestling Soup. I mean, there's a lot of shows out there that are fun, that have big followings, and they're good people who host them. I mean, a lot of the those guys I've met before, or I've been on their show, or I've interacted with them. Not all of them, but they're great. You know, they're great guys, and it's awesome. So you've got plenty of options out there. The Sound Off, of course, being one of them. Let's not forget that. Fernando from Bogota, Colombia. My question is regarding the invasion angle in 01. Since WWE bought WCW, why did they not bring in the big stars to invade WWE? When the whole invasion started, I was very excited, thinking I was going to see Sting, Vampiro, Goldberg, Goldberg, Nash, Steiner, Benoit right away. Instead, well, Benoit was already in. Instead, they decided to bring Chuck Palumbo, Mike Awesome, and some other not-so-great guys. Was it something to do with contracts and copyrights, or did Vince just not want the WCW stars to steal the spotlight from the WWE guys? My understanding was that it was always an issue of contracts. A lot of those guys, the big stars, Hall, Nash, Hogan, maybe not Hall, I don't know what the hell was going on with Scott Hall at the time, but like Nash, Goldberg, Hogan, Flair, I believe, they were still under contract to Turner, or whatever the parent company was at that time after the merger. And they had the option of sitting at home for the duration of the contract and collecting a big fat paycheck. I mean, hell, who wouldn't want that, right? Who wouldn't love to sit at home on the couch or go and travel and do whatever the hell they want to do and get free money? So a lot of those guys elected to do that. And I can't say that if Vince made a play that somebody would have said, I don't want to go to WWE. I think that if they really wanted those guys, even some of them, they could have gotten them. And I think if they would have gotten even just 2 or 3. So when the invasion starts and you have Eric Bischoff leading the charge with a group that includes Hollywood Hogan and Kevin Nash, or Flair and Goldberg, or any combination of just 2 or 3 guys, okay? I'm not saying you needed all of them at once, but you have Bischoff, who they got anyway, leading the charge with 2 or 3 big names and then guys underneath. And you know, they already had Booker and DDP, so you bring them in as well. That right there, I think, would have given them a good core of named WCW talent that people would have been able to buy into, and that would have gotten people excited. Excited as all hell, and I really, you know, I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I look back now on the invasion, and you could say that compared to what we have now, the invasion was great. You know, they still had more star power back then than they do now, and that's true. They had a lot more star power in 01 than you'll find in wrestling today. But they botched that thing so bad. That was supposed to be the holy grail of wrestling angles. The big invasion, WWE against WCW. You build to a big giant super card of interpromotional matches. I mean, it was right there. If they just played their cards a little differently, they could have played their cards and made so much more money than they would have had to have spent to get these guys. So if it would have cost them millions to get these guys out of their contracts and then sign them to new contracts, they would have made that money back tenfold. And that's why I think they really dropped the ball by not making a better attempt to go out there and say, listen, I'm going to buy you out of your contract. Let's bring you on in. I got an idea. You know, Kevin Nash, Hulk Hogan, I want to bring you in. Because at the end of the day, they brought every single one of those guys in, except, you know, Jeff Jarrett and Lex Luger. They brought, and Sting, but they brought in Hogan, they brought in Hall, they brought in Nash, they brought in Bischoff, they brought in Flair, they brought in Steiner, they brought in Goldberg. They brought every single one of those guys in anyway. Some of them only a few months later. So all it would have done was just speed up the process, pay a little bit extra, bring them in. You have to have a good idea. If you've got that idea, you're made. And you could have ridden that thing out until 2002. You build to a big super card at WrestleMania 18 of all or mostly, WWE versus WCW type matches. Goldberg versus Austin. I mean, there's so many possibilities that you could have built to. And they dropped the ball. They completely fucked up that whole invasion. Even the stuff that they did right, that was cool and exciting. July 9th, I'll never forget it. That was the episode of Raw when Paul Heyman left the booth and he aligned with the ECW guys. And the ECW guys all turned on the WWF guys. They beat up Jericho. They beat up Kane. Right? Rob Van Dam and Tommy Dreamer made their debut that night. Guys like Taz and Raven and the Dudleys were already under contract. They turned their back on the WWF. And all of a sudden, standing in the ring, led by Paul Heyman, was ECW. Now imagine if they had brought Bischoff in to lead in a group of WCW guys. And you've got a three-way war. WWE, WCW, ECW. ECW is kind of the renegade group. They come and go. They cause havoc, and chaos and all that kind of stuff. And what did they do an hour later when they did that angle? I mean, as a wrestling fan, I was on cloud nine. An hour later, they merged the WCW and ECW guys, and they had Stephanie McMahon come out as the new owner of ECW. And that was it. That was the beginning of the end. That was it, because that's not what people wanted to see. When people in their mind visualize what an invasion one day might look like, they weren't envisioning it as Stephanie McMahon is the owner of ECW, and they're just a bunch of guys, a giant faction. That's really what it became. It just became a big stable that was mostly filled with mid-card guys. Let's be honest here. I mean, talented guys, but Billy Kidman and Hugh Morris and, what was his name? Canyon and guys like that. That wasn't what people were interested in the invasion for. They wanted big names and big stars, and they wanted to see those dream matches that they never got. Booker T wanted him bad enough. He, I think, got out of his contract and he came over, and DDP did the same thing. And look what they did to DDP. Look what they did to Diamond Dallas Page. He's running away from The Undertaker. It wasn't even a match that they had at the King of the Ring that year. He's getting beaten up on TV by The Undertaker's wife. He's the stalker. He's going through The Undertaker's home, sniffing his wife's panties. This is Diamond Dallas Page. This is their grand idea for DDP, who ended up as a European champion, and then he had to retire because of a back injury. I dare anybody to tell me that they handled the invasion exactly as it should have been handled. That was WWE's fault. They made a big, big mistake by not going harder after those guys, getting some of them in, because they all ended up coming over anyway, and by then, it was too late. Andrew from Winchester, Kentucky. If the WWE Network launched during the Attitude Era when wrestling was hot, do you think it would have had the number of subscribers they want it to have? No, I don't. And I think that there's this misconception that because the Attitude Era was so successful and wrestling was so hot, and people were buying up merchandise like crazy, all the t-shirts, Austin 316, the NWO. I mean, they were selling like gangbusters. But the thing is, a lot of those new fans that came in were casual wrestling fans. They were not fans who were interested in going back and watching old episodes of Saturday Night's Main Event and Clash of the Champions, which is another aspect of this. If you're going to run a network, you've got to have more than just a library of WWE material. So at the height of the Attitude Era, we're talking 98, 99, maybe 2000. They don't own the WCW library. So all that WCW footage and the NWA footage and the AWA footage, ECW, which was still in business barely, but they were still around, they don't have any of that footage if they launched this network back during the Attitude Era. All they have is their own shit and not much else. So the amount of content they have is tiny compared to all the hundreds of thousands of hours of stuff that they have now. Most of which they still haven't put on the network, but that's a different story. But a lot of those wrestling fans who came in, I call them wrestling fans, they weren't really wrestling fans because a lot of them left, when wrestling wasn't cool anymore and guys like Austin went away and Rock went away to do movies and stuff. A lot of those fans disappeared. And then when WCW died, a lot of those fans disappeared. Maybe they gave WWE a chance and then they fucked it up and they said, the hell with this, I'm out, peace out. And they never came back. And WWE, ever since, has been trying so hard to get those fans to come back. It's not going to happen. They've moved on. It's been years. So as popular as they were at that time, you asked me, would they get the numbers they're looking for now? To make the network work, I think the number is like 1.4 million subscribers to break even. Originally, the break even, according to WWE, was 1 million. And then the last investors call, all of a sudden that number went up to 1.4 million. I guess because the costs involved in starting up the network were greater than they had anticipated. So all of a sudden that break-even number, which was going to be tough to hit this year, went up. So now all of a sudden that you have this humongous number. And here's the thing to keep in mind, and here's why this never would have worked. What's going to make the WWE Network successful, if it is successful today or next year, whenever, hopefully they break even. I want the network to do well. I subscribe to the network. I enjoy it. I think that they're mishandling it. I think there should be more content on there. There should be more original content. They're not doing any of that. There was stuff that they started adding months ago, shows from like AWA and World Class that haven't been updated in months. They just stopped. There's stuff in their library. People want to go back and follow week by week, almost like it was back in the day. They can't do that because they put a couple of shows up and they stopped. So I don't know what the hell they're doing with this network. But the key to make this network successful are the pay-per-views. If you take the pay-per-views away, this thing is already a complete flop and a failure, and it's never going to work. Because what we've seen so far is that if the demand was there for all of this old school content, if you had 1 million people out there who wanted to watch old Saturday Night's Main Event, okay, and old ECW pay-per-views, they would already be at 1 million or pretty close, and they're not. So they had to put those pay-per-views on the network. They had to basically kill their pay-per-view business if they had any shot of making this network a success. If you go back to the Attitude Era, they were doing so incredibly well, like in 99 especially. I think 99, I would say, was the peak year business-wise for them in the Attitude Era. Their pay-per-views were hotter than any other entity except boxing. Every now and then when there's a big boxing fight, boxing will always beat out wrestling, even today. But they were doing gangbuster business on pay-per-view. So what you're saying is, if they launched the network back then, it would be without the pay-per-views. So without the pay-per-views and without any of the tape libraries that they got ownership of later on, what do they have? What kind of network is that? It's not much of one. And they're not going to get anybody subscribing to it. You have to put the pay-per-views on there, and that would have been fucking insane for them to take their pay-per-views at a time when they were doing really, really good business on pay-per-view and to say, you know what, we're going to move these shows that we're charging, at that time it was probably still $30-something. Maybe it was $39.99. I know the prices have gone up since then. Let's just say they were still charging $35 per pay-per-view. We're going to go from charging $35 per pay-per-view, we're going to launch a network, and we're going to move all of our shows, or most of our shows, maybe except WrestleMania, off pay-per-view and onto our network for $10 a month. That would have been insane for them to do that. So there's no way that the network as it exists now would have ever been successful to the level they needed it to be back during the Attitude Era. It would have killed them. It absolutely would have killed them, and it would have been one of the dumbest things that they could have possibly have done. I mean, as a wrestling fan, it would have been cool to have something like that. But again, you're only getting WWE stuff. They didn't have ownership over all of these tape libraries that they now have. And if you're not into classic matches with Hulk Hogan and the Macho Man, I don't really know what the appeal would be for a network. James from Staten Island. Why is it now that the cities WWE visits with a rowdy and defiant crowd who actually cheer their favorites and boo who they dislike are referred to as smart cities? Why is it considered a negative for wrestling fans to go to a wrestling show, to actually enjoy the program the proper way? Even if I'm watching a show and it's good, if the crowd is dead, it doesn't come off as great. But when a crowd is really into a show, it can make that show memorable. Yet shows like this year's Royal Rumble, where the crowd shit all over the John Cena-Randy Orton match for being unbearably boring, and the moronic absence of Daniel Bryan in the Rumble match, which also incited the wrath of the Pittsburgh crowd, they were referred to as the internet crowd being rebellious. I actually found myself getting annoyed at statements like that because when wrestling was at its hottest, the crowds could cheer and boo what they wanted, and I don't seem to recall the fans getting shit for stating their opinion. I would bet that 99% of wrestling fans were able to access the internet and talk about it right now while they are on it. So to me, the term IWC is dead. What do you have to say on that subject? I think that the term IWC is fucking stupid. I've said this on my podcast before. Maybe it had some relevance years ago, but like you said, everyone's on the internet now. Everyone's on the internet 24/7 on their frickin' phone. So what does that mean? What does IWC even mean in 2014? It's just an expression that people, rely on. It's lazy. It's stupid. They don't even know what it means. It's like the people who use the word mark. People love to throw that word around. Oh, you're a mark. What a mark. I would love for these people, when they use that word, on the spot, to then explain what they think that word means. What do you think that word means? Most people wouldn't be able to answer the question if you put them on the spot. They'd have to think about it. You put them on the spot, they'd be tongue-tied. Fuck you. That would be their answer. I guarantee you most of those people don't even know what it means. But they use these terms because, hey, that's the cool thing to do. Meanwhile, they look like douchebags when they do it. So I'm with you in that. I don't use it. I'm not a fan of it. I think it's stupid. It's meaningless in today's day and age. It's an outdated term. And as far as people saying, well, it's the internet crowd and they're being rowdy and rebellious, I don't know. You have an arena of 15,000 people in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm willing to bet that the majority of those 15,000 people are not internet fans in the regard that they're on all the dirt sheets and all the internet wrestling sites and message boards and stuff like that. A lot of them are, but not the full 15,000. And it sounded pretty loud to me in that building that the majority of that crowd was in unison chanting what they were chanting during the Orton Cena match. And I don't believe it was just the mob mentality that only a few people were chanting it, so everybody said, "Hey, we'll chant the same thing." It seemed pretty universal what people in that building wanted and what they didn't want that night. And I'm with you. I think it's stupid to refer to crowds that way. David from Sacramento, I used my 1-week trial of the WWE Network to watch one of my favorite stories in history, Oh, here we go again. The Invasion. Now, I know the end game was to have Team WWF win, but for the most part, it was WWF versus WCW. ECW, while part of the alliance, plays second fiddle in the storyline. Do you think it would have been okay to see the ECW Championship brought in for this? I feel it would have worked for a good secondary story. Rhino versus The Rock or Kurt Angle could have been good main events on Raw or SmackDown. Rob Van Dam was super over at the time, and even main evented No Mercy. It would not have hurt to have RVD have his first run that way. As for the belt's endgame, I could see a WWF guy getting it while RVD or another ECW guy became the hardcore champion and unifying the belts at Survivor Series. No, that's a stupid idea. They did not need more titles. It was confusing enough when they had all the WCW belts, and they ended up unifying, I think, didn't they unify the tag belts and maybe something else? And I think they had the Cruiserweight belt, but there was also like a WWF Light Heavyweight belt. And they had the Hardcore title. WCW had a Hardcore title, although I don't think they ever brought it in or recognized that one in WWE. Maybe they did at the beginning. Maybe they merged them. Too many belts. Even today, one company, too many belts. You don't need an Intercontinental and U.S. champion the way they treat those titles. They treat those titles like shit. And now, I'm recording this, and the Battleground pay-per-view is this Sunday. Wade Barrett got hurt. The Intercontinental title is vacant. They're going to crown a new champion. They've done a good job of building up the Battle Royal and how important it is for people. They want to be the champ. I guarantee, and everyone's emailing me, oh, do you think that this is the beginning of a new era for the Intercontinental title? They're putting a lot of emphasis on it. Give me a break. How long have you been watching WWE for? Seriously. This is not the beginning of anything. This is not the beginning of some long-term plan. The guy got hurt. The title is vacant. They have a pay-per-view to promote on the network, which has to succeed or else their company's going to go belly up. And so they're going to make it an important thing. And in 2 weeks, they'll forget about it, and the Intercontinental title will go right back to being where it was before. The U.S. title is even more useless. I'm a WWF guy, so I would rather they just merge the two and have one Intercontinental title and just do away with the U.S. title altogether. I know the U.S. title has more lineage. It's been around longer. It hasn't meant anything in years. Just get rid of it. Have one secondary champion, one world champion, tag champs, Divas champ, and that's it. Just be done with it. So you can imagine during the Invasion, all the belts, and to bring in the ECW title would have meant nothing. What would it have meant? What purpose would it have served? Rob Van Dam ended up winning the hardcore title anyway. Him and Jeff Hardy had that hardcore title ladder match at SummerSlam in '01. I thought that was awesome. I thought their SummerSlam match was even better than their Invasion match. And that was for the hardcore belt. The hardcore belt was fine. You didn't need an ECW title. It would not have meant shit. Bryant in San Antonio, Texas. Suppose the WWE Network bombs. Is it worse than the XFL? Yes. Yes, absolutely. The XFL, I want to say that at the end of the day, Vince lost something like $30 million. Some people say it's not that high. NBC took on most of the risk. Let's say he lost $30 million, even if it was that high. That's still nowhere near the money that they pumped into this network. And if the network is a failure and they cut bait and it just ends up going belly up, and I hope that doesn't happen, they've already put a lot more than $30 million into this network. A lot more. And all the resources, they've had to fire people. I never heard about people getting fired after the XFL bombed. Didn't really have that kind of effect on WWE business. You didn't have people getting cut. You didn't have departments having their budgets slashed. So yeah, I would say the network bombs, then that's going to be a much bigger deal than the XFL. Donnie from Pittsburgh. Am I the only one who feels that Bray Wyatt is overrated on the microphone? His promos are not particularly well written. They're a confused mishmash of metaphors and symbolism that never adds up to much. Whenever he's done talking, I never have any idea what he just said or what he was trying to get across. He also changes his accent and inflections randomly, and I find it very irritating. I think a lot of wrestling fans praise his promos just because he's trying something different, even if he's not very successful. What do you think? It's funny, I get this question. I'm doing this video the day after an episode of Raw where Bray Wyatt did a promo on the Titantron and Chris Jericho was in the ring. This is before their first match, which is coming up on Sunday. And the crowd, for the first time during a Bray Wyatt promo that I can remember, was chanting boring. Now, were they chanting boring because they thought the promo was boring, or were they chanting boring because they wanted him to shut up and just actually come out into the arena and fight Jericho? That I don't know. Let's assume they were chanting boring because they were bored by the promo. That's the first time I've heard people say that. And I can only guess that a lot of what he says and the way he says it, it all kind of blends together. Now, if you pay attention to a Bray Wyatt promo, I think there's a lot of Jake the Snake Roberts in him. And it doesn't surprise me because I think Jake even said that, or I read somewhere that Jake has called up Bray Wyatt before. They've spoken. I can only imagine he's given him some tips and pointers. Who better to get some tips from than Jake the Snake Roberts when it comes to wrestling promos? I only wish that he really truly had his shit together, because I think if he could work with WWE in a real official capacity, even if that meant going on the road or going down to the Performance Center and working with guys on promos, I don't know that he's there. I don't want him to, fuck up any progress he's made with DDP and all that, but he could be a real asset, I think, to that company. And so anyway, I think Bray has a certain style of promo that people are either into or they're not. If people are not into these low-talking promos that use big fancy words they've never heard before, and he's trying to tell a story that these people just don't understand, the natural reaction is to tune out and start chanting boring. Now, this is the first time that's happened. This is not some sort of epidemic where people are rejecting Bray Wyatt promos. Normally, when I watch a Bray Wyatt promo and they keep the crowd noise in the background, and I actually wish they wouldn't do that all the time, but they seem to do it with every single promo these days. Most of the time, the crowd is quiet because it sounds like they're trying to pay attention to what he's saying. And that was the thing with Jake the Snake. And Jake's talked about that, where he would talk very low during his promos. And the reason he did that was, A, it sounded more sinister, but B, it would force people to really focus and pay attention to what he was saying. Any idiot can go out there and start shouting and ranting and raving. But when you talk low, people have to lean in a little bit more and they have to really pay close attention to what you're saying. Maybe that just doesn't work today. I don't know. It seems to be working okay for Bray. He had, one bad night. I don't think he's overrated at promos at all. There are some promos that, when he's done, I have no idea what he was trying to say. More often than not, I do, by the end of the promo, get the story that he was trying to tell. And I don't know how much control over his own promos he has. If they kind of give him a sense, okay, here's what today's segment is going to be about. You've got your match with Jericho coming up. So just talk about Jericho being a lost soul and just you run with it. Put whatever verbiage you want to it. I don't know if he has that kind of leeway or not. My sense is that, they script the shit out of everybody else. There's so many guys I can actually see the words in their brain as they're saying them. It just looks so rehearsed. I'm sure there are some guys who get away with that. Bray's still relatively new. If they've given him that power, that just goes to what they think about him as a promo guy. I don't think he's overrated at all. I wish there were more people in WWE who put the kind of thought and time that he seems to put into his own promos. Because I think it's actually really fun most of the time to watch Bray Wyatt do what he does. There's nobody else like him on the roster. But it's funny, because on the subject of low talking, I bring that up before. And then you have the case of Roman Reigns. Now, Roman Reigns is a guy who they've strapped the rocket to, right? They want him to be the next John Cena. Bryan's out, hurt. Who even knows when or if he's going to come back? So Roman Reigns all of a sudden becomes the de facto number 2 babyface, or the guy they want to be the number 2 babyface in the company and eventually be number 1. Reigns has this silent but deadly style to the way he carries himself into his promo. I like that personally, but what I do think, if I had one criticism of Roman Reigns, just to get away from Bray Wyatt for a second, I think the knock on Reigns for me is that sometimes he talks too low, and you can't hear what he's saying. Now, I'm watching on TV, and I got the volume up pretty high because I like listening loud, and sometimes it's hard for me to understand what he's saying, and part of that is because of the freaking crowd noise, which, like I said before, is I wish that more often they would have these promos, like if a guy is backstage, sometimes they want that crowd reaction. If The Rock was doing a promo and he says, "the millions," and then they wait for the fans to repeat the same thing. But if you could just have a guy backstage who's cutting a serious promo and it has nothing to do with the crowd, just cut the fucking crowd noise out. Do you really need people in the background? And the stupid thing that they do, the production team does, and it's got to be a Kevin Dunn thing, and it annoys the shit out of me, where in the middle of every single backstage promo, I don't know, this started like a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, every single backstage promo now, at some point, we have to cut to a camera in the arena, and we show the backs of people's heads as they're watching the promo. Half the time, of course, they're not watching the promo. They're looking in the camera and they're waving. They're looking at their cell phone. They're talking to the person next to them. Just completely takes me out of the promo, and I don't see what the point of that is. It's just one of those stupid things that their production team does that just bugs the shit out of me. But I wish they would cut the crowd noise out more often, and with Roman Reigns especially, because he talks so low, even in the arena. When he's in the ring, he was in the ring with Cena last night, and he had a great line where Cena was going on, and Reigns was going to cut him off and say, "Hey, John, get to the point." And that should have been a big line. I think it would have gotten a big reaction, but I don't think the people heard him, because I think in the arena, it's probably worse because there's so much noise. Even if there's not a lot of noise, just a little bit of noise, it's hard to hear when he kind of gets a one-liner off like that. So I would say that's a knock on Roman Reigns, who otherwise I think is really good. But Bray Wyatt, overrated? I don't think so. I think that's being too harsh, and I think he's one of the best promo guys they've got right now. They should have more like him. Albert Morris. If Lesnar vs. Cena really happens at SummerSlam, how would you book it if the plan is to put the belt on Lesnar? I say this because, for some strange reason, WWE does not let John Cena do clean jobs. So how would you book it to protect Cena while Lesnar wins the belt? Keep in mind, Paul Heyman is at ringside. Seth Rollins has the briefcase with Dean Ambrose hot on his heels. Well, I would not say that Cena never loses clean. He lost clean to The Rock. He lost clean to Daniel Bryan. Okay, and I don't want to hear that, oh, Cena had an arm injury in the match with Bryan at SummerSlam, and so his loss wasn't clean. They were protecting him. The finish of that match had nothing to do with the arm. He kneed the dude in the face and knocked him the fuck out. So that's a cop-out answer. I don't want to hear it. So that's two big clean losses right there. So let's not say that John Cena never loses clean to anybody. But it is a rare thing when it happens. Like with Hogan. You can count on one hand how many people Hogan lost to cleanly. Lost to at all. Let alone cleanly back in the day. The only clean pinfall loss, because he never tapped out, that I can remember Hulk Hogan doing in his first WWF run from the 80s into the early 90s was the Ultimate Warrior. I mean, who else did he lose clean to in the middle of the ring? I mean, he lost to some people. He lost to Andre in their rematch. That was a screw job. Who else? I can't even think of who else he lost. He lost to Yokozuna because a camera exploded in his face. Couldn't even lose to Yokozuna clean on the way out. So let's not say that John Cena is the worst offender when it comes to that. But I would say, as far as how I would see the match going, just an idea. But why not have Rollins try to cash in while the match is actually in progress? You know, maybe it's no DQ, like the first Cena-Brock match when Brock came back at Extreme Rules, and you play off the finish of that match. John Cena has him beat with an attitude adjustment on the ring steps. He lays out Brock with it again. He's about to win. People are like, most people are probably going out of their mind praying for Brock to kick out. So he goes to win, and people think, oh God, they're going to do the same finish again. And all of a sudden, Rollins runs in. He clobbers Cena with the briefcase. Right? There's no rule that says you can't cash in during a title match. We've never seen it happen before, I don't think. So Brock's already out. Cena's knocked out. Rollins is about to cash in. Ambrose runs in again to break things up before he can do the cash in. And they brawl for a bit. Place is going nuts. And they brawl down the aisle, or they brawl through the crowd to the back. Whatever. And that gives Cena and Lesnar now time to recuperate, get back to their feet. Right, they've both been they're both worse for wear, and from there they go through this final sequence where they each attempt their finisher on the other, and they wiggle out, and Lesnar ends up nailing the F5 first, and he gets the pin. And I would even tell that story throughout the match of Brock constantly trying to get Cena up for the F5, and Cena gets out of it, he wiggles out, and then finally, when he finally nails the move, all it takes is one, just one F5, and he beats the dude with his move. So Brock wins right in the middle of the ring, but WWE, in their efforts to protect Cena, can say, well, he had the match won. If it wasn't for Rollins, he would have won the match, but didn't work out. Vince from Dallas, I'm wondering what your thoughts are about Christian getting a Hall of Fame nod in the future. Blue Dot aside, he's won nearly every championship WWE has had. He's been in multiple classic matches. Given Vince's apparent disdain for the guy, do you think he gets an induction? I think the only way Christian gets an induction into the Hall of Fame is as a unit with Edge, or they somehow tie him into that whole Edge and Christian, Hardys, Dudleys thing. Because I think they all get in. Christian on his own, again, we're talking about a Hall of Fame. It's at the whims of Vince McMahon. I mean, anybody can go in. Barry frickin' Horowitz can go in. And actually, if they ever made a jobber wing of the Hall of Fame, he should be in there. But I think it's not going to be... It's not going to be a priority unless they absolutely just run out of people. I think he deserves it. I mean, look, he's been part of that company for a long time. He's been part of that company now probably for over 15 years. Came in 98, so do the math. That's more than 15 years. He's been a World Heavyweight Champion, Intercontinental Champion, Tag Team Champion, European Champion, I think Light Heavyweight Champion, Hardcore Champion, and he's very much a part of those classic TLC matches that put tag team wrestling back on the map in that company. And if the Dudleys deserve an induction, which I think they do, and the Hardys deserve an induction, which I think they do, and Edge is already in the Hall of Fame, so you can't put Edge and Christian in as a tag. I guess they could if they wanted to put Edge in a second time, but I think the idea of putting people in the Hall of Fame twice is stupid. They've done it with Flair. I just think it's so dumb. But I just don't think it's a priority. I think at some point it may happen because they just need people. So I guess the answer is yes. Eventually I see him getting in, but I don't see Vince saying, hey, let's put Christian in the Hall of Fame. I think it's going to probably have to be somebody else who says, hey, what about this guy? And he's like, all right, let's put him in. Ryan Rivera from Fort Worth, Texas. While thinking about the WWE Network and its initial financial impact on the company's bottom line, it's natural to think about other financial failures involving Vince McMahon. The XFL is obviously first to come to mind. I'm fairly familiar with the details of that disaster. What I have not heard much about is the story of the WBF, the World Bodybuilding Federation. I remember seeing advertisements for an event in an old WWF magazine hyping the return of Lou Ferrigno. And if I remember correctly, this was a pay-per-view event. Was bodybuilding that big in the 90s that people were ordering events on pay-per-view? How did the WBF generate revenue? Did they have weekly or monthly competitions? How much of a financial blunder was this at the end of the day for WWE? Yes, the WBF. How can we forget? I remember reading that Vince lost around $15 million, I think, all told. They were a private company at the time. There's no way to know for sure, and I can't even remember where I read that. But I think it was around $15 million, supposedly, that they lost on that whole thing. He didn't lose nearly as much as he did on the XFL or even so far on the network. But he didn't make any profit, or else it would have lasted a lot longer than it did, obviously. As best as I can tell, they had 2 events. That was it. They had 2 shows, and I think both were pay-per-views. They had one in June of 1991. I think that was the very first competition. They had another the following June, so June of 91 and June of 92. I don't think they had weekly or monthly competitions. He had a bunch of bodybuilders locked under contract. He let them compete in outside events when they weren't doing WBF events, which was hardly ever. You know, they had a weekend show that aired in 92 on the USA Network called Body Stars. They used to advertise that in the magazine. And Vince, I just remember the image of Vince in one of the Body Stars advertisements. I guess he was the co-host of the show, wearing this ridiculous outfit. Because even then, Vince was pretty jacked. He wasn't as jacked as he was when he got older. It's funny how that works. But he's always been in good shape. He's always been like a bodybuilding freak. And he was like wearing a shawl. He was like, I don't even know how to describe it. He was wearing this black shawl, and he had like the Zubaz pants back in the day. Oh, he looked completely ridiculous. But yeah, they had a TV show. It was very short-lived. It did like profile pieces, and they had some of the bodybuilders doing skits. Yeah, of course they would. Vince can't help himself. He did the same thing with the XFL. Remember that stupid halftime skit? I think it was during halftime. During one of the games, it showed Vince. I think it was like Vince got hit in the head and he got knocked out, and they go through like a dream sequence, and he wakes up and he's got like these scantily clad women all around, or maybe in the dream all the cheerleaders were scantily clad and they were all around him. And I know I didn't make this up. I didn't imagine this. Somebody listening to this right now saw the same thing. Maybe they can chime in the comments section and fill in the blanks on that. It was something completely ridiculous. And this aired on NBC. They expected sports fans to buy this shit. When he tries to turn real sports into pro wrestling, it's destined to fail. That's why he's had so many failures. Well, part of the reason why he's had so many failures. He can never get himself completely out of the wrestling bubble. He's got to bring some of that into this other stuff. If wrestling were that over with the masses, we'd have 5 million more wrestling fans right now. There's a reason why we don't, and why wrestling is not nearly as popular as it used to be. If people wanted to see it, God knows there's plenty of wrestling on television every fucking week, even without the network. And the pay-per-views. You got 3 hours of Raw, 2 hours of SmackDown. Main Event used to be on TV. Now it's not. You've got other wrestling. You've got TNA Impact for 2 hours on Thursdays. Okay, there's other shows internationally I'm not even thinking of right now. There's plenty of wrestling on television right now. Mostly from one company. If people wanted to watch it, it's right there. They can watch it all the time, and they don't. So it's no wonder that this stuff ends up falling on its face. So to answer your question, was bodybuilding that big in the 90s that people were ordering events on pay-per-view? Fuck no! Especially not if the name Vince McMahon was behind it. If there were 100,000 people buying bodybuilding pay-per-views, they would have done more than 2. Vince loves bodybuilding. He loves big muscles. His fascination with big muscles is why you and I and a lot of other people grew up watching The Warlord on television. So, thanks, Vince. Waja writes in, Dave Meltzer has said that he does not think Sting was a draw. Do you agree with such a statement? Well, I assume he's basing that on box office receipts and stuff that he's seen over the years that I probably haven't, so I'll take his word for it. You know, Sting, to me, Sting is a big enough star to be in any Hall of Fame. I know the big controversy is that Sting is not in the Wrestling Observer Hall of Fame, which actually is a prestigious Hall of Fame in that I think it's the wrestlers who vote on it. It's not fans voting in and stuffing the ballot boxes. It's actually people within the wrestling business who vote. So it has very little actually to do with Dave Meltzer. He just kind of runs the whole thing, and he tallies the ballots, and I think he has a ballot for himself. And that's how it works for those who have never heard about it before. Probably a lot more meaningful than the WWE Hall of Fame is, being that it's up to one person who gets in and who doesn't. But Sting's not in, and I think Meltzer has said before that he doesn't think Sting is strong enough to get in, and people are all up in arms. How can you say this? Sting has been around forever. He's a big star. He was the franchise of WCW. In his defense, I think his point is that when you really look at when Sting was on top, the periods that he was on top, which never really lasted that long compared to a guy like a Hogan or somebody like that, business was never really booming. Sting was never the kind of draw that Ric Flair was. He was never the kind of draw on top that Hulk Hogan was. He was never, business-wise, at that same level. He was always pushed as a... You know what? I actually shouldn't say that. He was never always pushed as a top guy. There was a period where Sting was wrestling for the TV title, the U.S. title. He was feuding with William Regal. He went through these periods where he was pushed down the card before he came back up to the top of the card. So I think that's really where it comes from. So was he a draw? Was he not a draw? According to Meltzer, he wasn't. I mean, he saw the numbers, the ratings numbers, the house show ticket numbers, pay-per-view numbers, I guess, when Sting was headlining pay-per-views, and he did headline a lot of pay-per-views back in the 90s at a time when WCW pay-per-views were not doing very well. If Sting was a big draw, those shows would have done well. It wasn't until Hogan came in. Say what you want to about Hogan. He got a fucking ticker tape parade when he came into WCW. When he was on pay-per-view, he drew. Pay-per-view numbers for WCW skyrocketed when Hogan came in. That never happened with Sting. Daniel from Huddersfield, England. Aside from Chris Benoit, is there anyone who you think will never make the list for a Hall of Fame induction? Also, is there anyone from ECW that you could see going into the WWE Hall of Fame? I think RVD and Paul Heyman will eventually, but what about guys like Raven, Sabu, and the Dudleys? Offhand, I don't know about anybody like a Benoit who would be excommunicated from the Hall of Fame. I mean, I'm sure there are guys who have done some horrible things or who have gone to jail for, rape and other horrible things like that who probably will not be considered for the WWE Hall of Fame. A lot of those guys, though, were not big stars, I don't think, in WWE. I mean, they were probably big stars elsewhere. So I can't think of anybody offhand. As far as the ECW guys are concerned, I think the Dudleys are going to get in eventually. Obviously, they have to get away from TNA. It's not going to happen while they're in TNA. They're going into the TNA Hall of Fame in October, which means nothing. But they will be in the WWE Hall of Fame at some point. They have to be. I think a guy that you didn't mention who I think could get a Hall of Fame nod at some point, he works for the company. So obviously they regard him very highly. And I was never a huge fan of his commentary. A lot of people are very upset when I say that. I just didn't think he was a great commentator, but I think he did a great job of carrying a lot of pay-per-views and a lot of shows on his own when he didn't even have a color guy. It was just him and him alone, and that's Joey Styles. Joey Styles was the voice of ECW, and so I think you've got guys like Gene Okerlund and Bobby Heenan and Gorilla Monsoon, and I mean, a lot of them were wrestlers. They turned into broadcasters, but you have broadcasters in the Hall of Fame. I think Gordon Soley, I'm pretty sure he's in the Hall of Fame. Jim Ross. I think Joey Styles deserves consideration as well for his work in ECW, and I think at some point he probably will get a Hall of Fame now. I don't think it's going to be anytime soon, but I think down the road I could see that. RVD for sure. Paul Heyman, absolutely. Raven, Sabu, they wouldn't be in my Hall of Fame. If I was running the WWE Hall of Fame, and I know they put guys from outside WWE in there, Raven, Sabu, Sandman, even, Taz I could go either way on, but those other guys, I don't see them going in, and I wouldn't put them in. Elliot in Houston, I was listening to some of the first sound-offs you recorded in 2007 and was wondering what are your thoughts about that year for WWE, looking back at it today with Cena's year-long reign is what he's saying, before getting injured. I guess that was when he tore his pec in that match with Kennedy. Undertaker and Batista's war with a great last man standing match at Backlash, the rise of Edge and Orton from Rated RKO to WWE and World Heavyweight Champion, Vicky Guerrero taking over SmackDown, and ECW Light with John Morrison and CM Punk. When I think of the year 2007, especially for WWE, that year will always be tainted by the Benoit stuff. I can't not think of the year 2007 and not think of what happened with Benoit. And if you hear any rumbling in the background, just as an aside, there's a thunderstorm outside, so just bear with me here. I can't think of that year without thinking about Benoit. That's just me personally. So that year will always be tainted no matter what. When I think of 2007, I'm going to think of things like the Vince-Trump match with Lashley and Umaga, because I think to this day that's still the biggest money match. I don't know if Rock and Cena surpassed it. They might have. I thought they came close but didn't quite beat the numbers for it. But if it's not still number one, it's definitely number two, the Battle of the Billionaires deal. So I remember that, and Vince getting his head shaved. Vince's hair has never been the same, unfortunately. His pompadour has never quite gotten back to the way it was. But I think of Triple H tearing his other quad, and with him going away, that opened the door for a John Cena-Shawn Michaels feud. We got the WrestleMania 23 match, which was very good, but I was more a fan of the match they had in the UK on Raw, it was like 55-minute marathon match that they had, which was probably the match of the year in WWE that year. Between that and John Cena's last man standing match with Umaga at the Royal Rumble, Cena had two of the best matches of his career in 2007, and he might have had another one that I'm not thinking of, but the two that stand out to me are the Umaga match, which I think is underrated, and the second match, the UK match with Shawn Michaels. So when I think of 2007, that's what I think of. I think that year was very important in the ascent of John Cena as a main event guy in WWE. He was already a main event guy. He had some great matches, but I think those two were two of the biggest that he ever had. David from Sacramento, California, you always have something great to say about NXT. I think it's got to be your favorite show of the week. My question is this. Various lower-level main roster members have appeared on the show, mainly to put over the new talent. Natalya said on a WWE interview that facing Charlotte for the vacant title was the most important match she's had in years. Do you think one of the best things to eventually happen would have one of these main roster low mid-carders win the NXT Championship or Women's title in heelish fashion so that a rookie can be built up to save NXT? I know where you're going with that. I don't like the idea. I think the NXT titles should stay on NXT guys. You can bring in main roster guys like a Tyson Kidd. I love what they're doing right now with Tyson Kidd and Natalya. Tyson Kidd being this passive-aggressive heel. Clearly he's a heel, even though he's still kind of being portrayed as a babyface or thinks he's a babyface. So I love what they're doing with him, and even Justin Gabriel now is getting some TV time, and he's an underrated guy on that main roster. There's no reason to put the title on those guys, unless there's like a really good storyline reason for it. I don't think Tyson Kidd is getting the belt. He already had his shot. He blew it. There's no reason to put the belt on those guys, especially for any length of time. The point is to be giving these new guys a proving ground for themselves, and you put the belt on somebody and you see, can he run with it? Bo Dallas was champion for a long time, and before him, Seth Rollins was the champion. Big E was a champion. Now it's Adrian Neville. To put the title on, who are you going to put the title on? Tyson Kidd? You're going to put the title on Brodus Clay before he got fired, he was feuding with Adrian Neville. That horrible feud. I don't want to see the NXT title on a main roster person. I just think that's a big mistake. Ryan from Baltimore. This will be the last one here. I was watching an episode of Raw in 1995, and they were advertising that the band Fishbone was playing at WrestleMania 11. They never did. What happened? Yeah, I remember that one. I think Vince, if I remember correctly, even interviewed them on TV before the show. Maybe it was like Superstars or something. I didn't even know what the hell Fishbone was at the time, but they were, or are, maybe I don't know if they're still together or not. They were an alternative rock band. They were supposed to be at WrestleMania that year to sing, I want to say America the Beautiful, or maybe that in the anthem. And instead they had some lady from the Special Olympics sing that instead. As the story goes, Vince heard their version, or what their version of the song was going to be, and he didn't like it. So he scrapped them from the show. It's too bad he didn't do the same thing to the DX band at WrestleMania 3 years after this. He could have saved us from that abomination of America the Beautiful. I remember Finkel announcing it as an alternative new wave edition of the song. It's like, yeah, an alternative new wave piece of crap is more like it. It's like, it's bad when you're singing that song, like the anthem, America the Beautiful, right? Very patriotic song. and you finish singing and you get booed out of the building. God, that was horrendous. Anyway, we'll end on that note. Keep sending in your questions for the mailbag for the main podcast or for future videos like this, the Solomonster at gmail.com. If you like what you heard, subscribe to this channel because I plan on doing more of these YouTube inboxes in the future. And you could also find other reviews, book reviews, DVD reviews on this channel that I've done for various wrestling items and interviews that I've done. You could find classic episodes of the Sound Off podcast from years ago that have just gone the way of the dinosaur. You can no longer download them or find them anywhere else. And I'm getting some of those older episodes up on YouTube as well. So subscribe to the channel. You can follow me on Twitter at Solomonster and always make a PayPal donation if you want on thesolomonster.com if you like what you hear. So thanks for listening. Be well. Stay safe. Please be sure to check out the full episodes of the Sound Off on thesolomonster.com, and we will see you right back here next time. Welcome to a special YouTube inbox edition of Sound Off Extra here on the official YouTube channel for the Solomonster Sounds Off Wrestling podcast, which you can hear episodes of in full every Sunday on thesolomonster.com, iTunes, and Stitcher Radio. And we do a mailbag segment on the podcast that you can always send questions to me for. The Solomonster at gmail.com is the email address for that. And if you like what you hear, you can support the Sound Off by making a PayPal donation on thesolomonster.com. You'll see the PayPal box on the right-hand side. I've been meaning to do this for a while, very backlogged with questions, so I said, you know what, I have a little bit of free time. Let's get a YouTube inbox going, so I hope to do these on a more regular basis. And got about 20, maybe 22 questions here I'm going to try to barrel through on this particular episode. So we're going to get right into it here. First question comes from Jermaine from Chicago. He says, being that Randy Orton got bloodied up back at Money in the Bank, albeit accidentally, now Bray Wyatt got bloodied up by Ric Flair, and now a possible angle within an angle with Summer Rae and Layla sharing a lesbian kiss at Madison Square Garden, puts me under the impression that WWE is kind of sort of weaning away from the PG era and back to what many older fans like myself are hoping they go back to having, an era, maybe not the Attitude Era, but a little like the Ruthless Aggression Era, but with a blend of sports entertainment and some shock value. Are you under that impression also, or is it just me? It's just you. You know, Randy Orton getting bloodied up at Money in the Bank was a mistake, and if you go back and watch it, they took painstaking measures, Kevin Dunn did, to make sure they didn't shoot Orton as much as possible. I mean, it was impossible not to show him with blood pouring down his face. He was part of the finish. But if you go back and watch, I mean, they were trying very hard not to show it. Bray Wyatt, for those, I don't know, people may be listening to this video months down the road, there was a Madison Square Garden house show this past weekend. Ric Flair was a special guest. This was before Flair came back on TV on Monday night, and threw a few punches at Bray Wyatt, one of which connected. I believe Flair was wearing both of his Hall of Fame rings. I don't know why you would do that if you're going to punch somebody. But he caught Bray with one of those shots and opened him up. Also an accident. They are not bringing back blood. They are not reverting back to the Attitude Era. They're not bringing back anything from that era. I mean, look, they will push the envelope every now and then. You know, we'll have an Extreme Rules match, and we'll have kendo sticks and steel chairs and weapons and stuff. And guys are going to get cut open. You know, it's going to happen. But it's not any sort of sign that they're getting more relaxed or they're going back to an era, you know, from 10 or 12 years ago. That's just not the case. Brian from Orlando, Florida, do you think Cesaro's momentum has completely halted since the pairing with Paul Heyman? Moreover than that, I remember the night after WrestleMania, the reaction that he got initially with Heyman was great, but over time he definitely cooled off. Can it be that Paul Heyman is at fault for him not having gotten more over? Also, with guys like Curtis Axel and Ryback who were, quote, Heyman guys, can you blame the wrestlers, Heyman, or the booking? Everyone assumes that this person or this diva should be Paul Heyman people, but if you think about it, all non-established stars are failing miserably with Heyman. Well, let's go back to the beginning of the question first. Has Cesaro's momentum halted since the pairing? Absolutely. I don't see how you can objectively look at it and say that he's in a better position now than he was. And that's disappointing because I was really enthusiastic about the pairing with Heyman. I questioned it a little bit just because he seemingly was on the cusp of becoming a a big babyface. People were already cheering him, the big swing. He had that big Battle Royal win at WrestleMania that people went crazy for at the Superdome. I was there. The place went nuts. And it kind of came out of left field. It's like, well, we're going to pull him back to the heel side for a while, but he'll be with Paul Heyman, so he'll be okay. And it hasn't quite worked out that way, and it's such a weird thing to think that here we are all these months later, and they split up the Real Americans because it was Swagger and Cesaro, and the person who is the most over right now is Jack Swagger. Now, I don't know if that's going to last. It may just be because, Rusev is over, and the stuff they're doing with them now is getting a reaction. I think Rusev and Lana, that act is so over. And you have the fans who, I'm not saying that everybody is cheering for Swagger per se. They're probably just cheering for America more than anything else. But the last several weeks, Jack Swagger has gotten reactions that he hasn't gotten at any other point during his career, even when he was the world champion all those years ago. Swagger is over. He is one of the most popular acts, him and Zeb, right now on the roster. And like I said, whether that lasts or not, probably not. But you look at where Swagger is and look at where Cesaro is. Who the hell would have thought that Swagger would be more over than Cesaro as a babyface? I don't know anybody who ever would have predicted that. So, has he cooled off? Yes. But as far as Paul Heyman is concerned, I got to defend Paul Heyman here. Because they put Axel with him. They put Ryback with him. True, they didn't get any more over. But how can you really blame Paul Heyman for that, would be my question. They put these guys with Heyman who have already been just beaten down and beaten down and beaten down. And after a while, it just gets to a point where you're pigeonholed a certain way. People look at you as a jobber. Or just a low to mid-card guy who's not a big star. Or was a star but isn't anymore. And probably is never going to get back to that level. They completely botched whatever they had with Ryback. They put themselves in a corner with that whole thing when they beat him for the first time, and he was never the same after that. In fact, Ryback went on a streak, I would joke about it on the sound-off, of months and months and months of being probably more over than his push was at the time, because I couldn't remember the last time he had won a pay-per-view match. He went months without winning a pay-per-view match, and then finally they turned him heel, and they put him against Cena. And then, as is usually the case, Cena beat him at the end of the feud, and Ryback was pretty much dead when that was over. You could probably point that out a lot of different times with feuds that John Cena has been involved in, but that's a different question. So, is Heyman really responsible? I mean, can Heyman really be expected to, on his own, rehab these guys back to a position where people take them seriously? It's all in the booking. I mean, look at what they did with these guys after they put them with Heyman. Axel won the Intercontinental title, and if I remember correctly, he lost probably more than he won. He would go out there on SmackDown, and he would go out there on Raw, and he would lose. And he would lose some more, and he would lose some more. And Ryback, too. Ryback was not immune to losing. And they would show Heyman with his head in his hands like he was disappointed. How can Heyman do anything about that? When you put these guys with him, and you're still treating them as jobbers, and you're beating them week in and week out, you can only expect so much from Paul Heyman. Paul Heyman can't change the outcome of the matches, right? So how much of that blame can you lay on Heyman? I mean, he's laid a few eggs recently, but I don't know that I would put that on his doorstep. I think more often than not, if I had the choice of taking somebody who isn't quite at the main event level, they're missing something, they don't talk well, but they've got something. This guy's going to be a star. They just need that little extra something. Paul Heyman is the guy that I would think of. Put the two of them together. That's what they did with Brock when they brought Brock in back in 2002. Brock was probably going to be a big star anyway, but he was brand new. Nobody knew who he was. He was a shitty talker. Heyman is exactly what he needed to help elevate him to that next level. So I think that's the perfect role for Paul Heyman to be in. You can't just take a job guy and expect that by putting them with Paul Heyman, he's got the Midas touch, all of a sudden the guy's going to be worth gold. If that were the case, they could have put fucking JTG with Paul Heyman. Or Kurt Hawkins. There's a reason they didn't do that, thank God. Paul from Ireland. I have noticed in recent years, Bret Hart within the internet wrestling fans' minds has gone from being the best ever to being bashed. While it could be said Bret does say some things in interviews that may make people roll their eyes, there's no denying that he is one of the best, if not the best. Shawn Michaels is one of the best as well, but I think in recent years, Bret has been seen as number 2 to Shawn. I love HBK, but if you look back at them both when they were on top in their prime and when they were mid-card and undercard acts in their early years, there's no denying Bret is superior. I do think WWE tends to go with HBK in this regard. Just wondering if you think Bret's legacy has gotten a bit of a bashing with regards to a lot of these shoot interviews and things that he has done. Bret Hart, when he does interviews, has a tendency to talk about himself very effusively. He talks about himself in glowing terms, and probably rightfully so. Look, I was a Bret Hart fan when I was younger. You know, Bret was carrying WWE on his back, I would say, in 93 and 94, and even 95. 95 was a shitty year for Bret Hart. I mean, I know he won the belt at Survivor Series, but look at what he did for the rest of the year. They put him in feuds with Bob Backlund, which was probably the worst match that Bret has ever had at WrestleMania. They put him in a feud with Hakushi, who was great, and they actually had a really, really good match at an In Your House pay-per-view that year, but Hakushi was never pushed as a major threat or a major guy. It was a demotion for Bret. He kind of moved down the card to work with him, but then he worked with the Pirate, Jean-Pierre Lafitte, also not a bad wrestler, but Isaac Yankem, Jerry Lawler's fucking evil dentist. I mean, 1995 was not the best year for Bret. But still, he would go out there and have these really good matches. He had some more matches that year with Owen. And, for that period, he was carrying that company on his shoulders. And in 96, they went with Shawn. And they put it on Shawn, right? Bret went away for a while. He took a vacation. Shawn was going to carry the company. He was going to be the champion. And I think they're very similar in that Shawn also went out there. He had great matches with a lot of guys. He brought Kevin Nash to the best match of his career. He had and put her in the same programs that AJ had with Cena and Punk and Bryan and Dolph. Oksana ain't getting over the way that AJ did. It's just not happening. So I wouldn't say she's overrated. Andrew Sieber, what are your thoughts on WWE doing an NXT road tour, having them do smaller venues so people who don't live in or near Florida can see the new talent? I think it would be good and bad. It would be good because I think if those guys were able to go on a real tour and go all over the country, it would kind of give them that experience that wrestlers used to have when they would work different territories, because they weren't just working in one place. Like if you worked in Florida, after a while, you can leave and go to Texas. And after that, you can leave Texas and go to California or Portland or New York or wherever. I mean, Stampede up in Calgary. There were tons of different places back 20, 30, 40 years ago, and it just doesn't exist like that anymore. So I think it would be good for them in that respect to perform in front of different crowds instead of the same people all the time. But I know why they don't do it, and it would be bad because if they leave Florida, then they're not able to be at the Performance Center. And they have their drills, they have their classes, they have to be there at a certain time every day, every morning. They do their training. So they have to keep it close to home, or else it becomes a major expense, which is the other aspect of it. They're cutting costs like crazy. Supposedly Vince McMahon wants them to trim up to $20 million from their budget, which is going to be coming from a whole lot of different places. They can't even really afford right now to take those NXT guys and put them on the road to other places. So I just think right now it would be a bad idea. But in a perfect world, they would be able to leave Florida just because you want to get out there. You want to be able to perform in different places, different buildings, in front of different people. And they're not really getting that right now. Zach writes in, if you had the ability to go back in time and change one event, I should say, in pro wrestling history in either WWE or WCW, which event would you change? How would you change it? And why? I wish that if I had the ability to do so, I could go back to 2007 and stop the Benoit stuff from happening. I think that's the easy answer. Who wouldn't? Who wouldn't want to go back in time and stop, Benoit from doing what he did? 3 lives were lost in that whole thing, including a kid. So you could talk about Owen Hart and all of these other horrible things that have happened in wrestling, but if I could go back in time and change one event, that would be it. Marco from Jersey, with you being my favorite podcaster, I was wondering who, if any, were your favorites to listen to, wrestler and non-wrestler included. I don't have a whole lot of time to listen to podcasts, which is kind of funny being that I do one. The ones that, like the wrestler ones that I listen to, I'm a big fan of Steve Austin when he interviews people. I remember listening to Austin when he first started his show, and listening to him now, he's improved a lot. And he's actually a pretty good interviewer. What I like about Austin when he interviews people, and this is what bugs me about other people who do interviews, and I try not to do this on the occasions when I do interviews, is they'll ask a question, and it could be a really interesting question that people would want to know the answer to. But for whatever reason, the guy, the person you're interviewing is kind of dancing around it, or he's taking a long time to get to the point, and then he gets cut off, or he loses his train of thought, and then they move on. And you never get the answer to the question. One thing I've noticed about Austin, very rarely does that happen during the interviews that he does. He stays on point. He's got his notes. He's got a plan. He knows exactly what he's doing. And if he asks a question and doesn't get the answer, or the person forgets, he'll go right back to that question. And and the person's like, oh, yeah, right, I forgot. And then they'll give you the answer you're looking for. It's a small thing, but I really like that about his interview style. I've listened to Jericho's interviews. I can't say that I listen to Jericho's podcast a lot. A lot of the stuff that he does and the singing, I'm not a fan of that. But he's done some good interviews. As far as non-wrestler podcasts, the good thing is if you're a wrestling fan and you're into podcasts like video, audio, whatever, you're in heaven because you have this endless supply of wrestling podcasts. There's so many out there. I hate to leave out, there's a lot of good ones out there. Some of them I've even, appeared on before. But PWR, Pro Wrestling Report, Wrestling Soup. There's a lot of shows out there that are fun, that have big followings, and they're good people who host them. A lot of the those guys I've met before, or I've been on their show, or I've interacted with them. Not all of them, but they're great. They're great guys, and it's awesome. So you've got plenty of options out there. The Sound Off, of course, being one of them. Let's not forget that. Fernando from Bogota, Colombia. My question is regarding the invasion angle in 01. Since WWE bought WCW, why did they not bring in the big stars to invade WWE? When the whole invasion started, I was very excited, thinking I was going to see Sting, Vampiro, Goldberg, Vampiro. Maybe Mick Foley's best match, like pure wrestling match of his career. You go back and watch that Mind Games match. So they were very similar. I can't say one was superior over the other as far as that goes. Shawn was a better athlete than Bret was, and he did more high-flying, flashy moves. I would say Bret was a better mat wrestler than Shawn was. So it was kind of a wash. They each had qualities that I think if you put the two of them together, it would make like the perfect pro wrestler. Does Bret say things that tarnish his legacy? Yeah, probably. Like I said, he talks very highly of himself. It's one thing for me or you to say to somebody else, hey, I think you're the best of all time. But when you turn around and you say you're the best of all time, people read into that as, hey, this guy's got a big ego. He's got a big chip on his shoulder. Bret has a tendency to wax a little too eloquently about himself in interviews. And also, he look, I don't know if it's the stroke or what it was. He doesn't pull any punches when he does interviews and he talks about Triple H, for example. He does not like Triple H. They're on amicable terms now, but he does not like Triple H. He does not think very highly of Triple H as this all-time great performer. Remember the whole 4 out of 10, meme thing that became a big thing? He has said some pretty cruel things about the guy, and I would imagine it's got to be at least a little bit awkward every time they bring Bret back. He probably deals directly with Hunter, so that's got to be a little weird, but he's got a lot of opinions on a lot of different people, and he thinks very highly of himself. So in the eyes of some people, yes, that has tarnished his legacy. To me, it doesn't make a difference what he says now or what he does now. He's long retired. He had the stroke and everything else. He hasn't wrestled. Legitimately wrestled in almost 15 years. I'm not counting the stuff he did in 2010 because I would hardly call that wrestling. To me, Bret will still go down as one of the best of all time. And I said this actually on the podcast I did this past weekend. Still throws the best worked punch in pro wrestling that I've ever seen. That's one of the things I like the most about Bret. He was realistic. He would go in there and the way he would throw punches and do certain maneuvers, and even the way he took bumps. I used to watch Bret Hart back in the day, and I would think, God, this guy's getting his ass kicked. Like legit, this guy's in there taking a beating. And that chest first bump he would take in the corner when they launched him into it and all that kind of stuff. Bret, there's a lot of little things about Bret that I think people don't give him credit for that I do and that I appreciate about what he brought to the table. So Bret, to me, is one of the best of all time. I won't call him the best. Maybe he would feel differently if you asked him the same question. This comes from Sandman. I've heard Vince McMahon would never make his workers do anything that worker did not want to do, as was the case with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 12. With Owen Hart, if he wanted to not do the stunt at Over the Edge, was there any thought on Vince trying it himself or rehearsals done on that night before the pay-per-view? It's possible Vince did. I mean, I never read anything about, they had a whole lawsuit and a court case and everything else. I don't think that Vince did it himself. It just never came up. And it goes back to the whole thing, who's responsible, whose fault is it? And Bret said that Owen didn't want to do it. He probably didn't. You're up 80 feet in the air, being lowered from the ceiling, especially if Owen was afraid of heights. I don't know if he was or not. Shit, I wouldn't want to do it either. But the thing is, he did it before. Some people forget about this. That wasn't the first time that Owen Hart was being lowered from the ceiling. I think even a few weeks before that, he was doing the Blue Blazer character on TV, and he was being lowered from the ceiling then, no different than he was going to be that night. So if he had a problem with it, he should have said something about it, and it's too bad that he didn't, if he felt like his job were at stake. Because that's what's been said. Owen didn't want to speak up, he didn't want to rock the boat, he didn't want to jeopardize his spot on the card. I just think that's so sad, because here's a guy who was a veteran. He had been part of that company for so many years. I know he wasn't like a world champion. He wasn't a main eventer at that time. He was wrestling that night for the Intercontinental belt. But he was on that roster for so long and such a tenured guy that you would think in his mind that he would have, enough cachet to go over to Vince or whoever and say, listen, you know what? I don't feel comfortable about this. I don't want to do this. So if we can change it, if we could do it a different way. And by all accounts, he never said a word, at least not to Vince or anybody else. Maybe he did to his brother, but that to me is what makes that whole thing so sad, is that all that had to happen was, if he was that worried about it, just tell Vince McMahon or Vince Russo or whoever's idea it was, I'm not doing it. Because I don't think they would have fired him. I mean, really, would they have fired Owen Hart if he said, no, I'm not doing the stunt, I'm not letting you lower me 80 feet from the ceiling? I find it very doubtful that they would have. Maybe they would have punished him some other way, but I don't think that he would have lost his job over it. Sandman also says, King of the Ring 1994. I saw on a recent Botchamania clip, they had Gorilla Monsoon, Randy Savage, and Art Donovan on commentary, with Art almost bashing wrestling and asking Gorilla, do you enjoy this? Just wanted to know if you could shed some background on this and what the original plan was. The original plan was exactly what you saw on television. It was Art Donovan, who was a big star in the NFL, and I could be completely wrong about this, but I want to say he played for the Baltimore, maybe it was the Colts back in the day. I know now it's the Ravens, but he was a local sports celebrity, long retired, and they wanted a local sports celebrity to be brought in to do some color commentary with Monsoon and Randy Savage. So they brought in Art Donovan, who clearly knew nothing about professional wrestling, had no business being there. He came off as this very affable, almost like childlike, because he was blown away by the whole thing. I remember watching, one of the tournament matches that night. It was like probably Mabel and somebody else. And he just couldn't believe that you had these two wrestlers in the ring who weren't in the same weight class. He goes, how is this even allowed? This guy weighs so much more than the other guy, and how much does this guy weigh, and how much does that guy weigh? IRS came to the ring, how IRS used to be dressed. He goes, hey, he looks like a businessman. It was funny, but it was also cringeworthy, and I'll never forget, during the pay-per-view at one point, Monsoon and Savage, more so Monsoon, you could tell Gorilla just was fucking fed up with this guy. Randy Savage at least tried to be respectful. After a while, Monsoon just completely ignored every question he was asked. He pretended like he didn't even exist. So at one point, they have a live shot of the announcer sitting at ringside, and you see all three of them. And the camera very slowly zooms in on Monsoon and Savage, and they completely crop Art Donovan out of the shot. It's just, it was pretending like he wasn't even there. Now, why they didn't just send somebody out in between matches to give the guy the hook and say, thanks, okay, this is good, and just bring him backstage, I have no idea. The only thing I could think of is Vince McMahon was not there that night. I think to this day that might be the only pay-per-view that Vince ever missed. I think he was having neck surgery, and so he missed the show. He wasn't there. So I don't know who was in charge. Maybe because Vince wasn't there, they felt like, well, we can't pull this guy because if Vince finds out that we did that, he won't be happy. I don't know. I don't know why you wouldn't send somebody out there to give that guy the hook. But it was exactly what it was supposed to be. It just, the guy didn't know jack shit about wrestling. It was embarrassing, but it was also kind of funny. So if you've never seen or heard Art Donovan's commentary, people have put together funny kind of compilations of all of his greatest quotes from that night. A very famous night at the King of the Ring in 1994. I would definitely seek out those videos and take a listen. Rodrigo from Brazil. Do you think AJ Lee is overrated? I absolutely think she got huge rubs by interacting with the likes of Cena, Punk, Bryan, Kane, and Dolph, but nowhere did I feel she was outclassed by any of them. You could argue that any diva would have gotten over by working with those guys. AJ has talent, and she's managed to make a gold mine out of what she has been given, but do you think she is overhyped? I don't think so. I mean, what's overhyped about her? You know, do they go out there calling her the greatest diva of all time? I've never heard them say that. She's this pint-sized little warrior who goes out there and kicks ass and has, quite frankly, a finishing submission hold that is far better than most of the finishing holds that a lot of the male main event guys have. I'll take AJ's Black Widow over whatever the fuck that STF is supposed to be that John Cena does any day of the week. There's nothing about John Cena's STF that looks even remotely devastating. AJ Lee, her move looks devastating. Some of the other women, too, have used submission holds recently. Emma. We don't get to see her on TV very often these days, but the Emma lock, that looks painful. There's nothing about John Cena's move that looks painful. So I think she's a good wrestler. She's got a few different moves in her arsenal. She's fun to watch. She's over. People are into her for different reasons, of course. Some people are into her because she looks like a young pre-pubescent girl, and that's a little creepy. Some people like her because they just think she's cute. Some people like her because, one day... Look, I'm sure there's a lot of young female fans out there who look at AJ Lee the way that AJ used to look at Lita. The famous shot of AJ when she was younger meeting Lita and then crying and all that. Probably a lot of young girls out there who see AJ as this tiny wrestler who says, hey, if she can do that, I can do that. So she's got a big following. I think she's got over 1 million followers on Twitter or something like that. I mean, so does Zack Ryder, so I guess that doesn't really mean much. But overrated, I wouldn't say she's overrated. I think she's probably one of the best divas that they have ever had. And I don't know that if you took Oksana